for coming to church on a Wednesday night. And before you get too comfortable, we're going to ask that if you would, some of you, if you would, you come down out of the bleachers. I know it's going to be difficult for you to do that. Nobody's moving. Because you're going to need to be able to see this screen tonight. If you can't see this screen, you need to move to where you can. Because tonight, Dr. Jeff has videos and things for you to be able to watch, and some of the notes that you'll need to be able to see. So I know that that's your normal seat up there in the nosebleed seats, but maybe you can come down tonight where you can where you'll be able to see a little bit better. We've turned down the lights a little bit so that you can see the screen better tonight. So thank you for being here. A couple of announcements that I need to give to you before we go any further tonight. But first of all, did all of you get a worksheet? If you didn't, you can raise your hand real high, and these wonderful guys will make sure that you get a worksheet to follow along with tonight. There's a few over here on my right. Anybody else, you can raise your hand real high, and they'll make sure that you get one. As they're making sure that everybody has a worksheet, I need to just make a couple of announcements. One is, please remember this Sunday night we will be having, we're going to change up the service a little bit this Sunday night. We will be doing communion in our Sunday night service this coming Sunday night. And we're going to have a prayer meeting towards the end of the service for Easter, for our Easter service. And then our Easter outreach that we will be doing out at the Field of Dreams. And so please come, make sure to be here, plan to be here. I think it's a little loud. Do I sound loud to y'all? Something's not. I can tell I'm too close. Too close to what? To you? Well, I know you. You normally sit way up there. I really can't even tell if it's Jeff or not. I have to ask him on Mondays, was Jeff Williams here or not? He's so far away, but you asked for it, so. But please come on Sunday night. Then Sunday morning, you're not going to want to miss Sunday morning. This morning, I was trying to study I always want to try to have something ready for Easter and try to preach maybe a few Easter sermons coming up to Easter. But how many of you know that Easter for the Christian ought to be every day? It ought to be every day. The resurrection, the cross, that ought to be a part of your life every day. About half of us said amen. But Easter really, and please don't take this wrong, but Easter really ought to be for the lost and for the folks that don't know about Jesus. Well, that doesn't go over good, but so this Sunday I'm going to be preaching a sermon the Lord gave me this afternoon. I promise you're not going to want to miss it. And I'm going to preach on Here Comes the Bride. And we're going to have fun Sunday morning. And, well, y'all are lively tonight, aren't you? And what a Sunday we had this past Sunday. If you missed Sunday morning, shame is your name. That's all I can tell you. The Lord spoke to us Sunday morning. And I'm still messed up over it. In fact, we've had people calling from around the United States that heard that message in tongues interpretation, and then the next message was given, if you'll remember, that asks, why do you refuse? So if it didn't impact this church and it didn't impact you, it is impacting people that are watching us by way of live stream around the United States. Because we've had people calling this week saying, man, what a stirring of the Holy Ghost, and what a question to be asked. And so what we've done, I've asked Debbie and Christy today to go back and listen by way of live stream, and we're writing out those two different words that the Lord gave us Sunday morning. We're writing those out. I don't know if you want it, and I don't even know if you care to want it, but I want it, and I'm going to read it over and over. So we'll make that available to you so that you can have that, and we'll have that this Sunday. I'm trying to find Christy. I've shook the whole room up. There's Christy and Debbie. I've shook the whole room up by moving. Now I don't even know where you're at. But so we'll have that at the back of the sound booth on a table for you this Sunday. If you want that word, you can pick that up back there. And then the second thing I need to announce is the First Ladies' Lunch tomorrow starts at 11. Is that right, ladies? Yes. But if you want to come earlier, I guess you can come earlier if you want to. And come and join us. It's a great way to come and fellowship. Tonight we are honored once again to have Dr. Hamby with us and his family. So honored that they have come tonight and being a part of this. And I know he got here early and is set up and ready. So please give him your undivided attention. Would you welcome him to this pulpit tonight?
Thank you, Pastor. Well, hello, y'all. Good to be back, and thank you for coming back. I appreciate that. I want to try to get everything started up here, and we've got a lot to cover. And this is the lesson that I enjoy the most, I guess, because I'm a doctor. But understanding a little more what Jesus did and kind of the forensics and the way that they point to some information that I think few of us have understood has actually occurred. And I'm going to have an assistant tonight, my cousin, Derek. Derek, come on up here, bud. Come over here, yeah. Derek is Tammy's first cousin. So I got the privilege of hog-tying him and helping me here. Bear with us. This is a replica of a tau cross. A tau cross, T-A-U. There's a stipes, S-T-I-P-E-S, that was permanently placed in the ground in Golgotha. This was permanently in the ground. And then they would carry the patibulum, which is this piece here. And let's carry this out front. This is 6 feet across, and that's 8 foot tall. And people are used to thinking Jesus on a Latin cross, a big, together that like 4 or 5 feet high in the ground. You know, there's feet down this, but that's not the evidence that's been shown from archaeological digs. And then 2 reasons forensically, and we'll show that in a second. So what they would do is they would bring the victim up and nail him on the cross, and then they'd put a ladder up front, and basically they'd walk him backwards up the steps, and then they drop this mortise and tenon joint in. This is pine, so bear with me. We're going to put it in place. This is tricky. They would bring him up, and then they drop this in place, and then they take the ladders away. So, Derek's going to show you. Derek is 6 foot. Derek is 6 foot tall and close to the 175 pounds that the Shroud of Turin puts him out at. Now you notice how he's not very far up there. And people used to think that Jesus was way up there on a Latin cross. But for 2 reasons, we think it was a standard tau cross. In John, it talks about them using a hyssop branch. Where they put a sponge on the end of a hyssop branch and offered that to Jesus. Okay? A standard hyssop branch is 20 inches long. It's 20 inches long. And so a hyssop branch, a hyssop bush was just about 1.5 foot bush. It wasn't much to it, and about 20-inch tall. So any much taller than that, you couldn't get to him. The average height of a Jewish man at that time was 5'1". And they think Jesus was 6 foot. How many of you got your handouts? How many of you read about the Shroud of Turin? Good. There's a lot of information there about the shroud. Both Dr. Zugaib and Dr. Barbet, which are the 2 kind of definitive physicians who wrote the books about crucifixion, both believe strongly that the Shroud of Turin is authentic. And we're using that information tonight from the shroud. This is the standard length of a Roman spear, 6 foot. On the shroud, it puts the entry wound at the 5th and 6th intercostal space, like this. Here. And you'll notice, to hit the heart from here, you have to have an almost horizontal plane. If he was up very much farther, the wound would have been here, near the xiphoid, up into the heart. But his wound was here, more horizontal. So it looks as though Jesus was on a standard tau cross, and he had to carry the patibulum. That's tough, isn't it, like that? Getting our hurts right in there like that. Yeah. Thank you, buddy. You can come off. Be careful. Got it. All right. Give him a hand, guys, would you? On the cross, Pilate had this placed, Titulus, in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And that's what that looked like. And it would go just on the top of that T right there. But that's what the Titulus looked like. So, let's get into the PowerPoint. On the forensics, we're going to start at the end because that is where the most compelling evidence is. That helps us understand what happened to Jesus medically. I'll be explaining this in both technical terms because there's physicians in the room as well as nursing, and then in layman's terms as well. So bear with me as we go through this. On the timeline, you'll notice that roughly 5:30 to 6 o'clock, there's been some debate when sunset occurred in Jerusalem, but they're pretty sure it was around 5:30 to 6. I gave 2 hours for the Last Supper, so 6 to 8 roughly for the Last Supper to occur. And then it's a leisurely 30-minute walk. It's 1.3 miles from the upper room down through the south gate in the old city of Jerusalem, cross the Kidron Valley, and up to the Garden of Gethsemane. So roughly at 8:30, they entered the Garden of Gethsemane. From there, we know that the Bible says about 3 hours of praying a minimum, so roughly 8:30 to midnight. Around midnight, and when Judas came, and then there's the 3 Jewish trials and the 3 Roman trials. And then around 7:30 in the morning is when the scourging took place. This is all supposition from the information that we've been able to gather. And at around 8:30, the Via Dolorosa, 8 to 8:30, the 650 yards carrying this. The wood they used, they were thinking 3 types of woods. It was either cypress, pine, or cedar. That was what they had to use. This is pine. That weighs 50 pounds. It's pretty heavy, wasn't it? But that weighs 50 pounds, and we were thinking the patibulum was between 50 and 75 pounds. And they would carry it like this. And the shroud shows smearing of the blood on the right shoulder as he was carrying the patibulum, instead of like this. They think he carried it like this because there wasn't any smearing of the blood on that left shoulder. But he couldn't carry that, the 650 yards. And then the darkness it's cutting off the bottom, but darkness from noon until 3 p.m. So that's roughly so here's the map of the Jerusalem at the time. Here's the upper room. They would cross down through the southern gate, through the Kidron Valley up to Garden of Gethsemane. Across the Kidron Valley, they can look into the temple. Did you realize that? Jesus loved to pray here. And he could look across the valley into the temple, into the Holy of Holies. Then Fortress of Antonia was right there. And the Romans came and built the Fortress of Antonia higher than the Temple Mount, so they could look down on the Jews as a kind of making a disgrace out of them. But they would flog them there. Then they would carry it 650 yards to the gate, and then there's Golgotha. So from Antonia to there. The historians believe Jesus made it to the gate before he collapsed, because the Via Dolorosa is so narrow, and it's hard to get people around you when you're on the Via Dolorosa. But when you get to the gate, then there's a large crowd, and they think that's as far as he made it, which is about 600 yards. He carried it almost 600 yards. Man, I bet it upset him that he couldn't carry it. Almost made it. So we are at a crime scene. It's 5 p.m. The coup de grace was just performed. That's the final blow. It's the death blow. There's about 58 degrees. The high in Jerusalem at this time of year is roughly 60, but it was dark and it was windy. So it was around 58 degrees, a little brisk wind, cloudy skies. An earthquake had occurred 2 hours earlier. When he died at 3 p.m., there was an earthquake. But they don't take them off the cross until dusk or sunset. And so roughly 5 p.m., they believe that that's when he received the coup de grace. And that's when they noticed this. Now, he's a previously healthy 33-year-old Jewish male, perfect genetics. His father's genes, I'm sure, were dominant, okay? So I'm sure he was a pretty healthy guy. But a carpenter's apprentice and very strong, no prior cardiac history, no hypertension, diabetes, anything like that. That's the tau cross, 8 foot, roughly by 6 feet. So the victim wears a crown of thorns, and this is the Syrian Christ thorn. This is what they believe it was. The Syrian Christ thorn plant was all over Jerusalem, and it was very important actually for honey production. They had a flowering plant and an edible fruit. It had 2-inch long thorns that would easily penetrate the scalp when dried. They would bring it in with the wood. They'd cut the wood, they'd bring it in the wood pile, and on the wood pile there'd be these thorns. And so they made the thorns out of the vines that were on the wood pile, and they think it was a Syrian Christ thorn. Other folks thought it was the Euphoria milii, not as many, but that one actually injects a latex poison. So it looks like that. Looks like that. That's the flowering plant. That's the edible fruit.
The two nerves that supply the head, the front part is supplied by a branch of the trigeminal nerve, and the back part by the greater occipital nerve. Now, when these nerves are irritated, they cause severe pain.
Over time, the condition can become unbearable.
All of a sudden, the patient has a sharp shooting pain either in one of the 3 branches of the nerve or the whole nerve. And it causes him to freeze. And in fact, many of these people will commit suicide.
That first person was Dr. Zugaib. He was actually the renowned physician who was the medical examiner for Rochester, New York, very prestigious forensic pathologist, and wrote one of the books about the crucifixion. So they think it was nailed through either the destot space or the Z area. And here is a replica. That's an 8-inch replica. See how it's square and pointed at the end. And this one is a 6-inch replica. And roughly between 6 and 8 inches is what most of the Roman nails look like. And that's a replica of what it looked like. Destot space is in the wrist. And just in front of that is the flexor retinaculum, which is like a zip tie, very, very strong. You could hang somebody, their whole body weight, on that zip tie thing called the flexor retinaculum. So they think it was destot space, but Dr. Zugaib is convinced it was through the Z area. So this is destot space in the wrist. If you nailed it through the hand here, there wasn't a lot of ligaments to hold the weight of the individual, so they thought it was to the wrist. But Dr. Zugaib is convinced it was through his area at the base of the thumb, which looked like this. And the Shroud of Turin is consistent with this. Actually went through the base of the thumb and traversed out at an angle through the back of the hand. And that's where the wound looks like it is on the shroud. And it also, in fact, it's funny, Dr. Zugaib is a funny guy. He took his medical students and hung them. I've mistreated medical students before, but I thought, man, this is pretty bad. But he put leather straps on the cross, and then he'd put them up there. They wouldn't actually nail them, but he put them up there, and then he would test them. He would see if it was hard to breathe and how long could they last up there and stuff like that. But he actually, this is a cadaver, and he took one of his cadavers because he's a pathologist. I don't know, I got away with this. And he hung them and nailed them through that and then put their body weight on that. And he was able to prove that this particular area could support the body weight. Okay, the nails transfixed the median nerve, which caused severe shooting pain and contractures. How many of you ever had carpal tunnel? Carpal tunnel syndrome is the median nerve. It's these three fingers here. It would initially cause a lot of discomfort and claw-like contractions, then paralysis.
If the median nerve is ruptured or injured, will also cause severe, excruciating, burning-like pain, like lightning bolts traversing the arm into the spinal cord. Now, we know from experiences during war, especially World War II, where did studies on a condition called causalgia, which is a condition caused by injuring the median nerve. The pain was so terrific that even morphine wouldn't help, and they had to actually operate on the spinal column in order to decrease that pain or to eliminate that type of pain.
And it's so severe that if you blow on the skin of the hand where the pain is, the patient will scream.
Okay, the feet was very similar process to the second and third intertarsal spaces, and it caused very similar paresthesias up the legs, where the nerves would become damaged and irritated as well. And that's the location of the nails as they would go through the feet. Now, the problem with this thing is a lot of people think that Jesus' feet were crossed and that they nailed through both feet. The problem with that physiologically and pathologically is that he was sweating and there's a lot of blood and it's slippery. And so it's hard to nail through 2 feet that are slippery without breaking a bone. And Jesus didn't have any bones broken. So they believe that he actually was nailed like this, side by side.
Abnormally.
When a nail pierces the top of the foot, goes through the top of the foot, whether it went through each foot separately or both feet, it would rupture or at least injure the plantar nerves, which go down in between each of the bones. The pain would be very similar to that of the hand because causalgia is the same medical condition, causing severe lightning bolt-like pains right up the leg, burning, searing type of pains.
So he would look something like this. This is an artist, a local artist, Christian Chapman drew this for me. And that's the tau cross with the Titulus at the front, his hands nailed through the Z area, and then his feet nailed in that location there. And he would look about like that. Now, the scourging, multiple deep tissue contusions, abrasions, and lacerations on his chest, back, and legs. And it looked like that. The flagrum looks similar to this, except there's usually only 2 to 3 thongs, which are these leather things here. And they would put metal bell, look at the picture there. Do you see little barbell looking things? They would have little metal barbell looking things they would hang at the end of them, and along with some bone and sometimes other sharp images, and they would.
We have a lot of descriptions from the ancient world for the flagrum, as it's called, for scourging prisoners, for beating them. Typically, it's simply a wooden handle covered with leather, to which are attached thin leather straps. These leather straps, depending upon how how much damage you want to inflict, can have little balls or knots attached to the end. You might just knot it, or you might actually attach a small lead or bone, or rather dumbbell-looking device, which, when flicked, as it were, with considerable strength by the person doing the beating, actually whips around the body and embeds in the flesh. And when it's pulled out, one bleeds profusely. So as the beating progresses, it spatters blood. You actually get a shower, a fine mist of blood everywhere.
In the case of the scourging, we're going to get a fluid loss from intensive sweating, but even more importantly, across the chest area will cause what they call pleural effusion, or fluid buildup around the lungs. Whenever you lose fluid or blood, the body will go into shock. The blood pressure goes down, the heart rate increases. In this case, blood pressure may go down as low as 80, 70 or 80.
There are situations.
And I thought this was interesting. This is actually a picture of the shroud. Do you see the little barbells there? Do you see the little barbell-looking things as on the contusions that were left on the shroud? I thought that was interesting. That looks just like the flagrum of the time that they would use. Number of lashes. Dr. Zugaib counted the number of stripes on the shroud, and he puts that at 110. With 3 thongs, giving it 37 lashes. And Dr. Barbet thinks it's 120 with 2 thongs. Either way, there was roughly 40 lashes with a 3 thong, or near equivalent to that. Okay, now this is the interesting part. Here's where we get to the good stuff. The shroud shows the entry wound of the chest wound, roughly 4 inches below the nipple line and 6 inches from the mesial liner, which is the middle of the chest. And it's on the shroud. It's on the left, so it's a mirror image. So it's the injury wound's on the right. Okay, that's where they went in. And John used the word pleura, which is what we use for chest wall. You ever heard of pleurisy or pleuritic chest pain? That's the chest wall, and that's the Greek word they used. It is 2 inches in length and 2/3 of an inch in height, consistent with a Roman lance. And that's what a lance looks like. That's the Roman lance that they used. And it was classic for what the entry wound looked like on the Shroud of Turin. So the entry wound appears to be more horizontal because of its location, right? If it went in here to jab the heart, it had to be more horizontal versus underneath the costal margin here up. So it was more consistent with a tau cross. And the hyssop branch. And here's in John 19:29, it talks about the sponge on the stalk of a hyssop plant. Blood and water. Now here's where the interesting part really, I think, is the really fascinating information. John 19:34 says, instead of one of the soldiers pierced Jesus' side, and he used the word pleura, with a spear, bringing a sudden flow of blood and water. The man who saw it has given testimony. His testimony is true. He knows that he tells the truth, and he testifies so that you may also believe. Please believe me. He kept going over, I'm telling you the truth, I saw this. And it's unusual because it's not normal to see blood and water coming from a chest wound like this. So,
The pleural effusion, which has gathered around the lungs, had filled up around the lungs, would be present when the spear entered the cavity. The spear would hit the heart and be pulled out rapidly. It was very quickly done. It would pull out blood followed by water.
now Dr. Zugaib is alone in his thinking about that. He said blood followed by water. It's going to be water followed by blood. Okay, because that's where the pleural effusion is on the chest wall. But in the Greek, and in fact, the Journal of the American Medical Association's articles talks about in that time, they put the importance of the word first. So when the Bible it says blood and water flowed, it was because blood was a more important word than water. But realistically, it was actually the water that came out because of the pleural effusion. Then the pericardial sac around the heart had all the blood, and then it flowed out after that. So it's unusual to witness that. But what are all the potential? It's probably more in this intercostal space here than that one. But it flowed out. Now, the Bible says a sudden flow. What does that imply? A force greater than gravity. There was pressure built. To build up pressure in the pleural space, the space between the chest wall and the lung, there needs to be at least a liter of fluid, because you reach a state of equilibrium when you die. Because when you stop breathing, you exhale and the diaphragm relaxes and you're in a state of equilibrium. But to force fluid out of a chest wall at a sudden flow, enough to come out with a force greater than gravity, there needed to be a considerable quantity of water and blood. Now, so here's the picture. Pierced, there's the pleural fluid, so the pleural effusion. Now, that's the lungs are suspended in the cavity, and that is the space where the fluid would have collected. And then here's the cavity around the heart. That's the pericardial sac. So when they pierced his side and drew it out, water came out, quite a bit of it, enough to flow out with a force greater than gravity, and then blood flowed out after that. There's only about 4 ounces of blood in the right ventricle. That's in about a small Dixie cup. Not much blood there. So there's no reason to flow out blood from a post-mortem wound into the heart. But a significant quantity did. A large amount of water and a large amount of blood came out. This is the Sudarium of Oviedo. That is the little towel-looking cloth that they found with the shroud, they believe was what they put on Jesus' face when they took him off the cross. Jewish tradition that they put this towel over the deceased and then get him off the cross and then held it in place with him face down and carried him to the wound and to the tomb and then prepare his body, etc. But then they would take that towel thing off and put it to the side. When they tested the Sudarium of Oviedo, they found 1 part blood and 6 parts pleural edema fluid. Now, pleural edema fluid is that clear fluid in the chest space that's caused from congestive heart failure. All right, when you go into heart failure, mom or dad have heart failure and they can't breathe. They get full of fluid, and that fluid seeps out and collapses the lung. They can have a large pleural effusion. Number 1 reason for a pleural effusion, large quantity of fluid in the chest wall, is congestive heart failure. The article, here's the references that kind of go through real quick. That's the JAMA article. These are the 3 main references I use for the forensics. And then Dr. Barbez and Dr. Zugaib. So that's the article. That's Dr. Zugaib's book, The Crucifixion of Jesus, A Forensic Inquiry. And then this is Dr. Barbez's book, which is a classic, A Doctor at Calvary. Been around a long, long time. So when Jesus had cried out again with a loud voice, he yielded up his spirit. Mark said, but Jesus let out a loud cry and breathed his last. And Luke says, and when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. That's in the King James Version. 3 of the Gospels heard a loud cry. That's not how you die on the cross. On the cross, there's some debate. They either asphyxiate, where you can't breathe, or you go into shock just from hypovolemic shock. You lose a lot of fluid from dehydration and blood loss, etc. Both of those ways, you die slowly. You do not give a warning. It's a slow and agonizing slide into death. That's how you die on the cross. You do not die with a sudden event. A sudden event occurred that caused intense pain to force Jesus to cry out in an uncontrolled fashion. And then he had the ability to say 2 quick sentences, Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit, and it is finished, and dead. As his blood pressure dropped from this sudden event. Very few things cause a sudden event and a large quantity of clear fluid and blood. In fact, most physicians believe there's only one that causes all of that explains all of that. So, a cardiac rupture. That's where a type 1 cardiac rupture is where the left ventricle tears open. It occurs within 24 hours of a heart attack. The heart attack needed to have occurred at least 10 hours earlier for the heart muscle to die, enough to necrose, to weaken, to tear. Okay? It's very painful. When someone has a tear in their left ventricle, it's a ripping sensation in your chest that takes your breath away. And as it tears, you will cry out. Anyone would cry out as it tears. And then as it's pumping blood through that tear in the left ventricle, blood pressure starts to drop precipitously, quickly. And then when that happens, you only have just a few moments, and you know you're dying, and you die as the blood fills the sac around the heart with non-coagulated blood. So there's the pericardial sac. The left ventricle tore open with a sudden event, cried out with intense pain. Blood filled this sac right here, and the pleural effusion was already there. He had congestive heart failure prior to the cross. Why? Because he couldn't carry the patibulum. He couldn't carry it. He's a healthy guy because he was in heart failure. Because he had to have had a heart attack at least 10 hours earlier to have developed a type 1 rupture. Okay? So, there's the left ventricle all torn up right here and dead, and there's the cardiac ruptures. Type 1 is a sudden slit-like tear that occurs a short while after a heart attack, myocardial infarction, usually within 24 hours. It needs to have been roughly at least 10 hours earlier for the heart muscle to weaken enough to tear. I have been unable to find any type 1 rupture earlier than 10 hours after a heart attack. This is from a textbook, type 1 myocardial sudden slit-like tear that occurs usually within 24 hours. Okay, so that's a type 1 rupture. Now, things that make you prone to a type 1 rupture. This is the article and the research that looks at 3 main risk factors for developing a tear in your heart. And that is sustained high blood pressure. By definition, he had extremely high blood pressure. You don't sweat blood unless you have extremely high blood pressure. That's part of the diagnosis of the disease process of hematohydrosis or hematidrosis. So he had extremely high blood pressure. Next, you force the victim to ambulate after a heart attack. So after they have a heart attack, if you force them to walk, that puts exertion on the heart, and that makes them much more prone to a rupture, a type 1 rupture. Jesus walked 2.5 miles after the garden. And then the last insult was the 650 yards uphill carrying a 75-pound. They forced him to exert himself for several hours after. And a naive heart. No prior heart attack. If you'd had a prior heart attack, the muscle changes. It scars. It's not prone to tear because it's too tough. Jesus didn't have a prior heart attack, I can guarantee you. I mean, he's 33. He was a healthy guy. He's never had any problem with his heart. He'd had to have had a congenital anomaly to develop a heart attack at this young age with God as your father. Okay? But those are the 3 main risk factors for developing a cardiac rupture, which is the only thing that explains the sudden event, the pleural effusion, and a large quantity of blood that surrounded the heart. I go into considerable more detail in the book, and it's out. It's on Amazon. So it's out, but it can explain even the other possibilities. I went through 4 or 5 other scenarios that other physicians have put forth and talked about why that can't be the case. They don't explain the sudden event, etc. But it goes into much more detail. Now, Takotsubo, I just like saying that, Takotsubo. That is a disease process that was first diagnosed in 1990 in Japan. It means lobster pot. And that is a disease process that Dr. Zugai, Dr. Barbet, really, they wrote their books prior really to even knowing what this entity is. It is the broken heart syndrome. I've got 2 patients in my practice today that have Takotsubo, cardiomyopathy. It's caused, they believe it's caused, they're not exactly sure, but this is the best theory, that it's caused from extremely high levels of adrenaline. Really high adrenaline levels. Think about it. One of my patients that have it, and can't say her name obviously, but she developed it because of her son who she lost to drugs. And it broke her heart. Just literally broke her heart. I've dealt with her for a long time after her son's issues and problems. And one day she started having severe chest pain. She went to the emergency room at Sparks. Her EKG showed a massive heart attack. ST segment changes all over the place. Her troponin, specific to the heart muscle, hugely elevated. She had a diagnosed, documented heart attack. When they did her heart cath, her coronary arteries were clear. She didn't have any blockages. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy occurs when the adrenaline levels get so high, the arterial wall spasms shut. And you have a heart attack from a completely healthy heart. And then you develop severe congestive heart failure from that. Okay, so the congestive heart failure persists, but you can have a heart attack in a normal heart just from adrenaline alone, from extreme duress. And believe me, this young lady's, she was 33, 4, had a heart attack. She may have been 40, can't remember. Anyway, her son lost to drugs, broken heart. It was, her heart broke on her. Now, this is some messianic scriptures. Psalms 22:14, I am poured out like water and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It has melted within me. Psalm 69:20, reproach has broken my heart and I am so sick. I thought that was interesting. When I read that, I thought, that sounds like a broken heart. A broken heart syndrome. So, just go with me. Here is the crucifixion. Right there is the rupture. He cried out with a loud voice, very quickly died after his heart tore. Go back with me. Where is the sign of a heart attack? At least 10 hours. So I'll put it here. And then the sign of the heart attack is right there in the garden. That's where it looks as though Jesus had a heart attack. A massive heart attack, enough to cause a type 1 rupture. And the kind of heart attack he had is called a type 2, which is the adrenaline-induced arterial spasm, which causes the muscle to die. And this is the evidence, hematohydrosis. You can read in your handouts the sweating of blood from extreme levels of adrenaline. And the sweat glands, the capillaries in there, they burst from pressures over stroke level for 3 hours. And what also has severe levels of adrenaline? Broken heart syndrome. So hematohydrosis and broken heart syndrome go hand in hand from severe levels of adrenaline because of severe emotional duress that he was under. So it looks as though Jesus had a heart attack in the garden.
Anguish is so great that his sweat becomes like great drops of blood falling to the ground.
The sweating of blood, called hematohydrosis, is actually a clinical term because there have been many cases of it. It was first described by Aristotle. Now, around the sweat glands themselves, there are multiple blood vessels in a net-like form.
Under the pressure of great stress, these blood vessels constrict until anxiety is replaced by resignation.
Suddenly, the reversal occurred. The blood vessels dilated to the point of rupture into the sweat glands. Concomitantly, the sweat glands started to produce a lot of sweat, pushing the blood to the surface, coming out as droplets of blood.
Mark 14:34 in the New Living Translation, only because I liked the way it says, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. The others say, my soul is crushed with sorrow. Some of the other translations say it differently, but I like the way that says it. My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. And then Matthew 26:39 says, going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed. So, Jesus was in the garden for at least 3 hours, collapsed on the ground, and had a heart attack. Sweat blood. Why? What would have caused Jesus, the Son of God, with perfect genetics, to have a massive heart attack from Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, enough to cause such damage that roughly 18 hours later, he had a type 1 cardiac rupture on the cross, which is the only thing that legitimately explains, and I give you a whole paragraph of physicians who agree with this scenario. Lots of articles have been written in books that agree with this scenario of the cardiac rupture. What would have caused that? And an angel had to come to strengthen him. Luke 22:43, and there appeared an angel unto him from heaven, strengthening him. That Greek word is the same word used in Acts when Paul said he ate some food and was strengthened. That's all it means. So the angel didn't come to comfort him. The angel didn't come to help him carry the load. The angel strictly came to strengthen his mortal body because he had a heart attack. Think about it. If the angel was there to help Jesus carry the load, wouldn't that be kind of like helping your son hit a ball off of a tee and then clapping for him as he ran to first base? Jesus wouldn't fulfill the wrath of God if his Father helped him. The angel was there to strictly strengthen his body to survive. Isaiah 53:10, King James Version, yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief when thou shalt make his soul. Do you notice how I keep emphasizing soul? Consider that. Think about that. I keep emphasizing this word over and over and everything I've said. And he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days. Have you ever really stopped and looked at that verse? He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Did you know that's the same phrase used in Exodus when it talks about honor your father and your mother that your days may be prolonged? That's the same Hebrew phrase. What does that verse mean? If you honor your mom and dad, God's going to extend your life, right? If you honor your mom and dad, your days will be prolonged in this earth. In Isaiah, God the Father saw his seed and he prolonged his days. He kept Jesus alive. Days in Hebrew is the same as an arbitrary amount of time. That's all that means. God the Father sent an angel to keep him alive. What other scripture would help to back this up? How about Hebrews 5:7? During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverent submission. Do you ever remember Jesus ever offering up prayers with tears and cries to ever save him from death? I don't. It had to be the garden. When he was asking to let this cup pass, he was saying, he said, take this cup from me, Father, but not my will, your will. Reverent submission. Not my will, your will, Father. But when he was saying, take this cup from me, he was using the present tense. Because he went back and he said, guys, I'm dying. I had a heart attack in the garden. And I'm asking my Father to keep me alive. Because I've got to make it to the cross. I am destined to make it to the cross. Because that's where I'm going to save all the people I love. But in the garden, he suffered a massive, fatal heart attack. And God sent an angel to answer the question that he asked, God, can you remove the cup? Because it's killing me. Can you save me from death? And God the Father said, son, I can't remove the cup. That's necessary. But I'll send an angel and I'll keep you alive. I'm going to sustain you. I'm going to keep your mortal body alive to handle this immortal debt. Because it was too much for his body to take. If you ever wonder why he had asked to take this cup from me, it was because he wanted to make it to the cross. Think about this verse. God the Father answered him. He was heard. That means God the Father was proud of him. He heard him and was proud of him and said, okay, I can't take the cup, son, but I'm going to bring an angel. We're going to strengthen you to make it. And I can't remove the cup. Right after the garden, what did he tell Peter when he cut his ear off? That thing he said, Peter, don't you realize that I need to drink the cup that the Father has prepared for me? He was ready. He understood. He understood then. God's keeping me alive. My Father's keeping me alive. I'm not going to die in the garden from a fatal heart attack that had to have occurred for a type 1 rupture to occur on the cross. Right before the garden, my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Right before the garden, he was ready. I was ready for this. This is what I'm supposed to do. And he knew the physical aspects of what was to come because he told his disciples 7 times. But when he hit the garden, something happened. Something hit him that he apparently wasn't prepared for, because he got on his knees and got on his face and was asking his Father, Father, take this cup, if it be your will at all. But not my will, your be done. But I'm dying. This is killing me, and I'm not going to make it to the cross if I don't have some help. He formed these 2 lines we talked about last time. He prayed out loud, face down, collapsed. He asked his best friends to stay awake to watch and pray. Have you ever heard that phrase, watch and pray, before? Would you just use it? I think he used it one other time. That actually means to be a watchman. He wanted them to stay awake and to be a watchman, to help pray and stay awake and watch. Why would he need his disciples to do that? He never asked them to do that before. He prayed at least 3 hours. He returned to his disciples, found them sleeping, and couldn't you keep watch with me for 1 hour? And then he asked Peter if, and then he returned twice to them in similar prayer sessions. So, right here, the fatal blow. He was dying of a heart attack in the garden. The fatal blow didn't occur on the cross. It occurred in the garden. And God the Father had to come and sustain his life. He had to prolong his days. And he was being kept alive by God the Father. He asked 3 times to my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. He was sweating at 50 degrees, and it was John 18:18. It was cold. And the servants and officials stood around a fire and to keep warm, and Peter was with them. He started sweating blood. The angel required to strengthen him to keep him alive. The fatal blow was in the garden. He suffered a massive type 2 heart attack. Required God the Father to keep him alive. And Jesus' mortal body was kept alive to carry that immortal debt. What could have caused that? What could have caused Jesus to have a heart attack in the garden? And all those things occur. Why did on the cross did he say at the end, Father, or Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? I want you to do some homework. I want you to look up sabachthani. And I want you to compare that to what David actually said, which was azabtani. And I want you to do some homework to find out, when Jesus quoted Scripture, did he quote Scripture in Aramaic? Or did he only quote Scripture in Greek and Hebrew? And what is Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani? That's Aramaic. Why would he say, my God, Elohim, Elohim, why have you abandoned me? Why have you withdrawn your support from me? So do that homework, guys. And I know this is tough. This is hard because a lot of big words and everything with the forensics. But the book goes into more explanation, and you can kind of read through it in more layman's terms. But it proves that Jesus had a catastrophic event in the garden to require his heart enough time to necrose and have a type 1 cardiac rupture on the cross. That's the forensic evidence that I saw that pointed me towards something in the garden. And then I want you to look and see, what did God the Father want for the propitiation of sin? What was it that he said would satisfy him? It was something about a soul. And then I want you to think about, what's the difference between the bread and the wine at the Last Supper? Why did he make that distinction? And then next week we'll conclude and hopefully answer all your questions. Pastor?
I'm not sure that any of these things, as he was going through, I was sitting there thinking a lot, but some of those things I was thinking is, which only one would I want? And the answer is none of them. I don't want a crown of thorns on my head. I certainly don't want to be hit with this, or nailed to a cross, or beat, or any of those things. But he did every bit of it for you and for me and for everybody that's not here. He did it for us. And so it's a very sobering thing. Thank you, Dr. Hamby, for your study and for your information I'm sitting there thinking, how come I don't know some of this stuff? But everybody has their gift, and I praise God this is his gift to be able to share this with us. So thank you. And your book came out today, is that correct? And it can be found on Amazon. Do you have any that will be here next week before Wednesday? Well, we will bring our money, and we will be ready to buy one. How much is it? They're $100 a piece? $10 a piece. So bring your $10 next week, and we'll have some here for you. Please be in prayer for our Easter services. We're going to pray corporately Sunday night, so please don't stay home Sunday night just because of that, because we're going to take communion together Sunday night, and then we're going to take a time of a meeting to plan. We are expecting somewhere around 6,000 at our Easter event, and